Alright, so yesterday I finished up the entire HTML section for FreeCodeCamp. So today we're going to knock out the CSS section. And I hope this helps those that need it. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate putting it in the chat. So introducing the basics of CSS. CSS tells the browser how to display the text. It's basically styling your page for you. Note that CSS is case sensitive, so be very careful with your capitalizations. CSS has been adopted by all major browsers. The one browser that always seems to have a problem, though, is Internet Explorer, but go figure. There are three main ways to apply CSS styling. They can apply inline styles to HTML elements. So the idea behind CSS is that you can use a selector to target an HTML element in the DOM and then apply a variety of attributes to that. So we're going to go ahead and go to the first lesson. So now let's change the color of some of our text. We can do this by changing the style of your H2 element. So our H2 element is up here. The property that is responsible for the color of an element's text is the color style property. Here's how you would set your H2 element's color. So we do H2 style color blue. So now that is good practice inline. Let's change the color to red. So we're going to go ahead and go right here, and we're going to add the style, and then we're going to add the color, and it said red. So we're going to add red right there. And that changed that to red. So we're going to go ahead and run that. Oh, it should end with a colon. My bad. Yes, it should. There we go. Let me mute my phone, otherwise it's going to be ringing this whole time. Alright. So with CSS, there are hundreds of CSS properties that you can use to change the way an element looks on your page. Res. So when you entered H2 style color red, you were styling that individual H2 element. So obviously with inline styles, inline means we're writing it right inside of this element. So inline would be here. Otherwise, you would do it in a separate area dedicated to styling or in a separate style sheet. And then you'd link that style sheet to your HTML, which is a little advanced for the moment where we're at right now. All right, so one way to be specific of the style is to add style at the top, correct? So inside the style block, which is what this is called, you create a CSS selector for all H2 elements. For example, if you wanted an H2 element to be red, you would style them like this, which is very accurate. Note that it's important to have both an opening and closing. As I always give the example of, you have to have an opening and a closing. It's like an open door. You got to close the open door. So you also need to make sure that your element style definition is between the opening and closing brackets. So let's go ahead and delete our H2 element style attribute and instead create a style block at the top and return all H2 elements to be blue. So we're going to go ahead and delete this right here. And we're going to go here and we're going to make style, which is the opening tag. And you know, an open door, you got to close it. So we're going to add the closing tag right there. Hey, how's it going? Just popping in for a bit. It's quite late here for me. Thank you for stopping by. I appreciate you being here. Just trying to go through this section. So then here we're going to go ahead and add an H2. And then we're going to do the color blue. And now that changed all H2 elements to blue. I appreciate you coming by, though. I appreciate all of you coming by. Purple hearts. Nothing but love. And I'm wearing my Hacktoberfest, so I'm rocking the purple today for real. Alright. Classes are reusable styles that can be added to HTML elements. Now, yes. So, like I was, if you were here yesterday, I was discussing how when you have a class item, the one way to call that would be using a period. Whereas if you have an ID, which I don't think we have one listed here. So if you have an ID, oh yeah, we do. If you have an ID, you would call that with the hashtag symbol or, you know, however you call that. But class would always be called with a period. So you can see from what we created with CSS called blue text within the style. You can apply a class to an HTML element like H2 class blue text. Note that your CSS style element, the class names start with a period, correct. Inside your style element, change the H2 selector to .red text and update the color's value from blue to red. So let's see what we got going on here. So give your h2 element the class attribute of red text. So where's the h2? Here it is. So we're going to add our class here. So we're going to do class, and we're going to do red dash text. And what we're going to do here is instead of saying h2, we're going to do dot red text. And then we're going to change this color to red. So now, by utilizing this period, it called this class right here, and it changed this text to red. Alright. Now, on my regular account, I do donate $5 a month, but since I created a brand new account just to do this so everything would be undone, that's why that's still popping up. Now, you do not have to donate to FreeCodeCamp. It is completely free. But with as much as FreeCodeCamp has done for me personally, that is why I donate. This is exactly where I started, and it gave me the career I have now, so I'm a huge supporter of FreeCodeCamp and everything they do, so I have no problem donating that. Classes allow you to use the same CSS styles on multiple HTML elements. You can see this by applying your red text class to the first P element. Do you plan to do the same for the I do plan to do the same for the JavaScript course. My goal is to go through everything until the React section. I may even do the Node section if people really want that. I think most of the demand really comes up to that point, and with most of my followers, that's where they want it to be. So I have no problem doing as much as I need to make sure I'm at least guiding you. Because I remember when I was going through this, there wasn't that many resources, and the at that time too, the curriculum was a little bit different, and I really struggled. And just like I was saying yesterday, you know, I did the entire HTML section in 45 minutes, where before, it took me several days. So with the knowledge I have now, I really like showing and explaining all these things that you're learning, because at that time there was no context to what I was learning. So I was just kind of just saying, okay, this is what this does, and even though it doesn't make sense to me, this is what it tells me to do. But now I can add that context for you, so hopefully it makes these concepts stick and become permanent without you having to redo the same thing over and over and over again. Plus, I've been giving a lot of real-life situations where you utilize these things, so that way it really wants to stick in there with you. Yeah, I'm thinking, let me just open this up just to see. Oh, I opened form, didn't I? That wasn't what I wanted to do. So let's see. So we got this section. We got this. This is probably going to take the rest of this week, and then probably Monday or so we should be on this section here. So, and what I do plan on doing is taking my time in the JavaScript so I can explain everything very detailed. So that way, because I know a lot of people, I get messages every single day on this JavaScript section. So I want to take my time and really explain these concepts so that way it sticks. And then you'll hopefully never have to buy another Udemy course or anything like that to explain what's here. Because I remember I was so lost in JavaScript the first time around that I must have spent a ton of money just buying Udemy courses trying to understand everything. So hopefully we can try and make sure we give you these concepts. And of course, once we're done with this, we're going to go back to, live streaming some, coding some projects, and, giving you portfolio items that you can utilize and, build out your portfolio with. I've been following you on the Twitter community dev for quite some time now. Thank you for doing the things that you do to help others like me get further in their upcoming careers and fields. I appreciate that. I always tell people tech completely changed my life, and I know it can do that for others as well. And if I can facilitate that in some way, I really want to do that. So I can't. And like I always say, I want to celebrate in your success. So I want you to do good so I can do a happy dance for you. So you got to do good so we can dance together, all right? All right, so where were we at? Classes allow you to use the same CSS styles on multiple elements. You can see this by applying your red text class to the first P element. So we're going to go ahead right here. We're going to add the class, and I believe it was red dash text. Correct? Correct. I'll have a few JavaScript books on my blog at that. Well, that's the blog. You can check that out. Font size is controlled by the font size CSS property like this. Font size is something that you're going to utilize for sure in the future. And now this is cool, but what ends up happening is in most business situations, career situations, we don't really use pixel all the time. There's definitely cases where we do, but a lot of times we utilize like M and rem, which is something I think we cover coming up. But inside the same style tag that contains your red text class, create an entry for P elements and set the font size for 16. So inside, so we're going to do, so now that we have, this is one block. So that means anything that happens to red text is here. So now when we create a second block here, this is going to control something completely different than the red text. It's not going to affect anything going on here as well. So we can go ahead, font size, and it was supposed to be what? 16 pixels. And we do that, and it changed the font size for that one element alone to 16 pixels. You can set which font an element should use by using the font family property, correct? So for example, if you want to set your H2 element's font to sans serif, you would use the following CSS. Very useful to understand font family. You're definitely going to use this all the time in any project that you do in the future. So make all of your P elements use the monospace font. So we can go ahead and just, instead of creating another block, you can just hit enter here, and now you can add more items to this. So that's why you'll have, sometimes with CSS, you'll have multiple items in that one block. I mean, I've seen blocks with 50 or 60 items in there, you know, just because it's maybe a div, which we covered in the HTML section, a div where there's multiple items inside that div that you need to control. So we're doing our font family, and the font family that we need to utilize is monospace. So we're going to go ahead and run this test, and there we go. Alright, so in addition to specifying common fonts that are found on most operating systems, we can also specify non-standard fonts. Correct, you can import your fonts using Google Fonts or any other. So the question is, please explain why divs are used. So imagine you have water, right? You need to put this water in something in order to ingest it, so you need to put it in a glass. So a div in a sense is like a glass. So you can customize that glass to where it could be a glass, it could be a bowl, but it's a sectioning area that you're determining to put your items inside of. So, and the cool thing about a div is, once you put those items in there, you can style them, you can control them, you can move them around. So you're definitely going to use divs all the time in your career. And it's covered in the HTML section. And if you didn't see my stream yesterday, you can go to my YouTube channel. It's the same name, youtube.com/DThompsonDev. And I uploaded the entire video there. Thank you. I'm glad that explanation helped. So Google Fonts is a free library of web fonts that you can use in your CSS by referencing the font's URL. So let's go ahead and import the font. To import a Google font, you copy the font's URL, which is given here, I believe. And we're going to use Lobster. I don't think I've ever really utilized Lobster in my career, but we're going to go ahead and do it here. But at least now we're going to, use it. To do this, copy the following code snippet and paste it on the top of your code editor before opening the style. So what's happening here, let me explain this to you. So to have anything link to your page, you need to add what is called an style sheet link at the top. So that's what's here. It's called link. href, as we covered in HTML, means we're directing to a link. So for example, on an A tag, I believe we have an A tag right here. Do we? Oh, here. So A tag, which means, anchor tag. href, where we're directing that link to go. So here we have this link tag, which it's directing to this fonts, and it's coming back as a style sheet. So that means we're going to pull this and utilize this. So later on, when we get to coding HTML and CSS pages, we'll have one page strictly for CSS, we'll have one page for HTML. So it won't be done like this where it's all done at the top. It'll be on a separate page, and then you would utilize this to link them, so that way all the styles on that page will take effect. And it keeps everything nice and organized, and it helps you really make very long and robust code. So we've got that style sheet for Lobster up there. So now you can use the Lobster font in your CSS by using Lobster as the family name. So I don't know if we're supposed to change it into P. So create a font family CSS rule that uses the font for H2. So we're going to go right here, and we're just going to do, well, it's bad practice to go there, so let me go there. So we're going to do H2, and we're going to do font family lobster. And so now all of our H2 elements will be using that font family of lobster, and the other ones will be using the monospace. All right, there are several default fonts that are available in all browsers: monospace, serif, sans serif, correct. One font is not available. You can tell the browser to degrade to another font. For example, if you wanted an element to use the Helvetica font, which I'm a fan of, but degrade to the sans serif instead. So you would actually put, this is our first choice, and if it's not available, I want to go to our second choice. And that helps, because if you don't have a second choice and it's not available, what's going to happen then? You're not going to be able to showcase what you want to do. Under the advanced menu, settings to disable low latency. Alright, so I know this is an HTML question, but can you explain the use of a class attribute versus an ID? Okay, so essentially they both do the same thing, and I went into this yesterday, and if you missed the chat yesterday, check out youtube.com/DThompsonDev, and I have the entire HTML section. It only took about 50 minutes, I think, and I uploaded it there where I kind of went into this topic as well. But there's no big difference between a class and an ID in these like circumstances. You don't have to worry too much. What happens is a lot of times you'll make like a class for multiple items, and then you use an ID to target that single item. So in the case of, let's say, this H2, and we have this class here, but now we have multiple H2s, and I just want to target this one specifically, I can now add an ID to that, and then I can target that ID. So I will say in your career, especially as a developer, you will utilize class significantly more than an ID, but an ID is very good to know and utilize, and especially when you just want to attack that one thing, you're perfect. And no, you're fine to ask that. I mean, that's what I'm here for. I want to try and help you out as much as I can, so I'm going to try and cover as much as I can. To begin, apply the monospace font to the H2 element, so that now has two fonts, a lobster and a monospace. So we're going to go here. In the last challenge, you imported the lobster using the link. Now comment out the import of that. All right. So we're going to comment this out. And if you remember in the HTML section, this is how you comment. So by adding this, we comment this section out. If we don't put this, it'll comment out the whole code. So make sure, like I always give the example, this is an open door. You have to close that door. So that's the closing tag to close that. I appreciate you appreciating that effort. And there we go. And just to show, where was it? What are we doing on the H2? So this is the H2. So obviously, you know, by removing that lobster, it changed to that monospace. So we're good there. We're almost 20% of the way, so we're making some good progress. CSS has a property called width, which you will use all the time, that controls an element's width. Just like with fonts, we'll use pixels to specify the image's width. Now, pixels are great, but of course, as we start learning more about being responsive and, you know, taking different screen sizes, we will always use pixels in the future, but it becomes less and less common, and you start utilizing percentages and, you know, things like that to keep things flowing well. And that's why, you know, CSS Grid and Flexbox are such huge things. For example, if we wanted to create a CSS class called larger image that gave HTML elements a width of 500 pixels, we would use this. Which, you know, it's the class, larger image, the width of 500 pixels. So create a class called smaller image and use it to resize the image so that it's only 100 pixels wide. Due to browser implementation differences, you may need to be at 100% zoom to pass this test on the challenge. So, and as I explained yesterday, certain things with FreeCodeCamp are very case sensitive, and like they're very space sensitive. So sometimes like you may add an extra space and that'll throw the whole thing off. So try to be aware of that when you're doing these things. So create a class and use it to resize the image. So we're going to go here and we're going to create a class, and it's called smaller image. And we're going to do the width at 100 pixels. So now we need to go to this image of this cat. Where is the image? here. And normally, under normal circumstances, it's good to add the class at the beginning of all that instead of at the end. So we're going to add the class and it equals smaller image. And there's a typo there. And we can run this test and we are good. And as you can see, it reduced the size significantly from this whole big picture to right here. Now, so as you see now, we're starting to stack up our, styling and our elements here. So instead of just having one thing per, area, now we've got multiple. So this is when you're starting to get more into the creative aspect of controlling things and sizing them up. So CSS borders, which you will use, have properties like style, color, and width. For example, if we wanted to create a red 5-pixel border around an HTML element, so in this theoretical case, this is a thin red border, you could put this around this image and it would create a border there. So create a class called thick green border. This class should add a 10-pixel solid green border around an HTML element. Apply that class. Okay, so I predicted the future there. Remember that you can apply multiple classes to an element using its class attribute. So class 1, class 2, which is a very good use case. So we're going to create this, and lucky for us, they kind of gave that as a template. So we know we need to create a class. So what do we need to put at the beginning in order to call that class? We need to utilize that period. So then we're going to name this the thick, dash green dash border. And then we're going to put our our brackets. So it should add 10 pixels. So first thing we got to do, we're going to do the border color, and it's going to be green. Then it says 10 pixels. So we're going to do border width. So that's obviously controlling the size of the border. And it's going to be 10 pixels here. And then we're also going to solid. So we need that border style to be solid. And then we need to add this class to this image. So here's the image. And then here we have that class of smaller image. So we can go right here, add a space, and now we can type thick green image. Border. Sorry. Thick green border. And there we go. We have this thick green border that just popped up. And one thing to pay attention to, you notice that these classes, there's no spaces. It's a single word. The space is the separator. So you're not going to name any class 2 words. If you do, you're going to utilize this convention, or you're going to use something called Camel Case, which I went into yesterday, which would be something like thick green border. So you will not capitalize the first letter of the first word, but each additional word, the first letter will be capitalized. So it makes it very easy for you to read this, even though it's all jumbled together. Thick green border. Oh, I wrote think, but whatever, because it's just an example. As opposed to this, you don't really know where the breaks are. So you'll definitely learn that. There's Camel Case, Pascal Case, but you'll definitely get used to that. So let's go ahead and run this test. We're good there. Your cat photo currently has sharp corners. Correct, it does. So we need to use some border radius. There we go. You can specify a border radius with pixels. Give your cat photo a border radius of 10 pixels. So instead of creating another thing, we can just add this here. And so we're going to do border radius 10 pixels. Is that what it said? 10? Yeah, 10. And now all the corners are gone and it's rounded. And you're definitely going to use that in the future. I've used that countless times. In addition to pixels, this is where we're starting to get into more interesting things. Now you can do a percentage. So we're going to give our border radius, instead of pixels, a 50%. So 50%, and now it's a circle, because 50% is half of it. You can set an element's background color with the background color property. For example, if you wanted an element's background color to be green, you'd put this in the style. So green background. I think we're familiar with this concept at this point. You use that to call your class. This is your class name. and then you put what you want to happen here. So create a class called silver background with the background color of silver. Obviously, that's pretty, and assign this class to your div element. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and add this right here. So we're going to do silver background, and then we're going to do background color, and we're going to do silver. And now, so create a class called silver background, and I forgot to add that period there because it's a class. So we're going to, now we need to add this to our div. So let's find the div, and here it is. So we're going to the div, and we add class equals silver background. Now remember, the reason why we didn't add a period here, the period stands for class. So you wouldn't put a period inside of a class because it's not calling a class itself. So remember that period up top represents this class. And then we have our class name. In addition to classes, each HTML element can also have an ID attribute. There are several benefits to using ID attributes. You can call an ID, ID attributes also should be unique, correct. Browsers won't enforce this, but it is widely agreed upon best practice. One thing that I want to stress to you, get in the habit of being very descriptive with your class names and IDs, because especially when you get into the position of working in a company, it is very important because you'll be, surrounded by, code that's in the millions of lines. And if you don't have descriptive IDs or classes, you're not going to know what they're referencing. So, and that goes also into like your for loops in JavaScript where you'll do like I++. I represents nothing. No one knows what that means. Same thing here. If you're just saying red text, that's not really descriptive. Whereas, for example, if I were to name this, I wouldn't name this background. I would name it, things cat love background or something like that. It needs to be descriptive to where if I was just reading this, I would know exactly where it is. And by naming it something like things cats love background, if I just read the CSS, I'll know exactly what it's referencing besides silver background, because silver background could be anywhere in the code base. How long should a newbie focus on CSS before moving on to JavaScript? My rule of thumb is pretty simple on this. If you can comfortably make a static website, then it is time to move on to JavaScript. Because obviously, if you're going to be in front end, this is a very big thing that you're going to need to learn. But JavaScript is going to take you so long that you might as well jump into it, and you can keep learning CSS things as you go. Because my rule of thumb has always been, I have 3 rules when it comes to becoming a developer fast, and it's ABL, ABB, CCC. Always be learning, always be building code. Learn through multiple methods or whatever means you have necessary. Build. When you build, you make your concepts permanent. Remember, in tutorials, nothing breaks. In real life, everything breaks. I could easily break the silver background and not have to debug. So building and facing those errors and will teach you a lot, but also when it's not doing what you want it to do, just by doing that Google search to figure it out, you'll learn so much instead of something hand-holding you through. So if you can comfortably make a static website, if you can make, a website displaying your favorite movies or whatever it may be, then it's time that you can move on to JavaScript and start learning how to make that dynamic. So I hope that answers your question. ID attributes should be unique. Browsers won't enforce this. Here's an example of how you can give your H2 element the ID of cat photo app. Correct. Give your form element the cat photo form. So where's the form element? It's right here. And then we're going to go ahead and put the ID at the beginning. You always want your identifier or your class to be at the beginning so you can read that right away instead of having to go through, actions and labels or whatever it may be. So we're going to go ahead and add cat photo form. And we add our space there. Give your form the element the cat photo form. Your form element should have the ID of cat photo form. Okay, whoops, that's the mistake right there. Alright. One cool thing about ID attributes is that, like classes, you can style them using CSS. However, an ID is not reusable and should only be applied to one element. Correct. IDs should not be used same thing over and over. If you need something to identify multiple things, utilize a class. An ID should be used for that single use purpose. So a class could say, red text, for example, here, and everything that needs to be red text can have that same class, but then you could add that ID so that way you can target that thing by itself. Here's an example of how you can take your element with the ID attribute of cat photo element and give it the background color of green. And same thing like the class, you just need to use a hash symbol in the front instead of a period. Remember, period references class. This references an ID. Hey, thank you for coming by, Angie. And for the few people that are in here, make sure you're following TechGirl1908 on Twitter. I'm a huge supporter, huge fan. She's my sister, from a different family, but I love her and I absolutely support everything that she does. Definitely show love to her. Note that inside your style element, you always reference classes by putting a period in the front. Code Steel likes to say Octothorpe. Yep. So right here, so let's go try giving your form, which now has the ID attribute of cat photo form, a green background. So we're going to go ahead and do the form. So what did we name our form here? Just to make sure. So we're going to go right here. It's cat photo form. So we'll go up here into our style area. And remember, it's an ID. So to call an ID, we're going to use the hash symbol. We're going to use cat photo form. And then we're going to use our brackets right there. And it needs to have a green background. So if you remember, we do background color. And then we add that green. And now, as you see our form, it turned green. So remember the difference between utilizing that period, which calls class, versus the hash symbol, which calls an ID. And remember, the ID should be unique to the item that we're calling. If you need that cat photo form, for in this instance, to be multiplied, utilize a class instead. You should only use that ID to target one specific thing. I've always wondered that. I get that request probably 40 times a day. And, I went through that process a lot of just adding people that begged me to add them. What do you gain out of me following you? Like, when you're posting something, is that the kind of content that you think I would be interested in? Normally, I don't ask people to follow me. What I do is, if their content is attractive to me, I will follow them for that. Like, for example, in the case of Angie, I love her content, so I follow her for that. Make your content robust, and I'll find you if it's necessary. Now let's put our cat photo app away for a little while and learn more about HTML. Yes. So you may have already noticed this, but all HTML elements are essentially little rectangles. 3 important properties control the space that surround each element. We have padding, we have margin, and we have border. Definitely good to know all 3 of those. You're definitely going to use it in your career nonstop. An element's padding controls the amount of space between the element's content and its border. So if you have a box, that padding can separate the innards of that box. So here we can see that the blue box and the red box are nested within this yellow box. Note that the red box has more padding than the blue box. So as you see, the padding is pushing these things out this way. Now the margin would move it physically, but padding is creating the space. So when you increase the blue box's padding, it will increase the distance between the text and the border around it. Change the padding of your blue box to match that of your red box. So now we got to read, right? So we have our yellow box here, we have our red box, and the padding is 20 pixels. So we need to match that, so our blue box needs to have 20 pixels. So right now it's 10 pixels, so that's why it looks so slender. When we go ahead and delete that and add that 20, we now have that space that has been created. But notice that the box itself hasn't moved, it's maintained the same position, but all of the inside content has expanded. Thank you for following. I appreciate that. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate in dropping it in the chat. An element's margin controls the amount of space between the element's border and surrounding elements. So here we can see that the blue box and the red box are nested within the yellow box. Note that the red box has a bigger margin than the blue box, making it appear smaller. So your margin at this point is squishing these sides. So when you increase the blue box's margin, it will increase the distance between this border and the surrounding elements. So change the margin of the blue box to match that of the red box. So our margin here is 20 pixels, and our margin here again is 10 pixels. So let's go ahead and change that. And now we've squished the sides and we're there. Well, I don't want to say squish the sides, excuse me. When we just do margin, it is attacking all sides equally. But now, and I think it's about to come up, you can attack, I don't want to say attack, but you can add the margin to individual sides, and that would move that side one way and leaving the other sides exactly the same. An element's margin controls the amount of space between the element's border and surrounding elements. If you set an element's margin to a negative value, it will grow larger. So for example, you know, when we added margin last time, it went in this way. But if we add a negative value, it will move that way, expanding it instead of contrasting it. So try to set the margin to a negative value like the one for the red box. Change the margin of the blue box to negative 15 pixels so it fills the entire horizontal width of the yellow box around it. So we need to read, we have our box, that's not what we're looking for. We have our yellow box, because that's obviously controlling this, and they're all classes. Now we have our class for red box, which is controlling this, and now we're at our blue box. And so we need to change the margin from to negative 15. So what we can do here, we add our negative 15, and now it's basically filled out the area. Sometimes you will want to customize an element so that it has different amounts of padding on each of its sides. CSS allows you to control the padding of all 4 individual sides of an element with the padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left properties. So give the blue box a padding of 40 pixels on its top and left side only, but only 20 pixels on the bottom right. So we need to add this where, give the blue box. So it's going to make me want to write it all out. Okay. So padding, and then we'll do top. So padding top is going to be 40 pixels. Then we have padding top on, and so we have padding left, which is also 40 pixels. And then we have padding bottom, which is 20 pixels. Padding right, which is 20 pixels. Now, there's a much easier way to do this, but of course I think it wants us going in order, but you can actually just write padding, and then you can write these, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So we have this, and I added that. Let me just run this test, and that's correct, right? So I'm going to cut this out, and you could do padding, and now what we can do is it goes top, right, left, top, right, bottom, left. So we'll do 40 pixels, that's the top, 20 pixels for the right, 20 pixels for the bottom, and then 40 pixels for the left. And that will produce the exact same thing. And it still passes the test as well. Yes, you can. I think it wants us going in order though. But I saw that after I explained it. But yeah. So, and it wants us to do the same thing then. So sometimes you'll want to customize an element so that it has different margin on each of its sides. CSS allows you to control the margin of all 4 individual sides of an element with the margin top, right, bottom, left. Same thing we did before. So margin, padding, it follows the same metrics in this situation. So give the blue box a margin of 40 pixels on its top and its left side, but only 20 pixels on its bottom and its right. So, and this is for the blue box again. So we're going to go here, and we're going to do margin top, and that's going to be 40 pixels, margin, what is that, left? It's also 40 pixels. Then we're going to do margin right, which is 20 pixels, margin bottom, which is 20 pixels. Now you can use the same example that I did before, but right now it wants us understanding each one of these properties. So that way, in the future, if you just need to do a margin top, you only need this. You don't need to put the values for all 4 areas. You can just write that margin top 40, and that'll solve that for you. Instead of specifying an element's padding top, right, left, and individually, you can do them like this, like I showed you before. These 4 values work like clock, so it's top, right, bottom, left. So let's do it again, top, right, bottom, left. So it's going to go top, right, bottom, left. And that's in all situations. So using clockwise notation, give the blue box a padding of 40 pixels on its top and left and 20 on the bottom and right. So can you create a parallax effect using just CSS, or is JavaScript required? No, you can create that with just CSS. I made a tutorial on that one time before, and I don't even know if it's on the YouTube channel. It might be. It might be. I believe it is, actually. So we're going to have... I need to create more tutorials. So I do a lot of meetups where developers from all backgrounds come together and we learn together, and we have speakers that come teach. So we have all these great meetups, and I record those meetups and I put them up on the channel right now. But I plan to release all these tutorials for these things that I've made and showed off, like banking applications that only made with HTML and CSS, and I have a random insult generator that's made with JavaScript as well. Rock, paper, scissors, all that good stuff. So I'm going to be releasing all that real soon. But right now, because most people get the most use out of these streams, I've been using these streams to go over basic concepts to help people get to that next level, to where we can start building some really interesting stuff. So if you don't want to change the padding on one of the sides, could you put 0 pixels? So you don't even have to put the pixel, you can just put the 0, and that would work. So we're going to do top, left, and top and left, and then bottom and right. So we have top is 40, then we have right, which is 20, then we have bottom, which is 20, and then we have left, and that should work right there. Yep. So let's try this again, but with margin this time. So we're going to do the exact same numbers that we just did, right? Top and left, yeah. So we'll do margin. So we have 40 pixels, 20 pixels, 20 pixels, 40 pixels. Because remember, top, right, bottom, left. All right. So you have been adding ID or class attributes to the elements that you wish to specifically style. These are known as ID and class selectors. And if you remember, just to go over this one more time to make this concept solidified, to call a class, we need to utilize a period. To call an ID, we need to utilize the hash symbol. So let's bring out a cat photo app again to practice using CSS selectors. So for this challenge, you will use attribute value. Attribute selector to style the checkboxes in the cat photo app. The selector matches and styles elements with a specific attribute value. For example, the code below changes the margins of all this. So type equals radio. Using the type attribute selector, try to give the checkboxes in cat photo app a top margin of 10 pixels and a bottom margin. You're never going to really... I don't remember really ever using this, but yes, clockwise. Using the type attribute selector, try to give the checkboxes. So we're going to go ahead and it's going to give a top margin of 10 pixels and a bottom margin of 15. So we'll go here, let's add it at the bottom. So we're going to do type equals checkbox, and then we're going to go this way. And it says add a margin, and we're going to do 10 pixels, top, 0, 15 pixels, 0. And there we go. So the last several challenges, I'll set an element's margin or padding with pixels. Let me get a drink. As I was suspected, I was always right all along. I don't know what it is. As I got older, I think like funny cups, they make my life go well. I don't know. I just love them. Anyway, pixels are a type of length unit, which is what tells the browser how to size space in addition to pixels. CSS has a number of these. The two main types of units are relative. Absolute units and physical units are in inches and millimeters, but in programming you're going to use ems or rems. So this is very big, especially when you're thinking of like responsiveness and things like that. So it's very useful and you're going to utilize this a lot. Definitely make sure you get used to utilizing this. Highly recommend it. I use it every single day. For example, M is based on the size of an element's font. If you use it to set the font size property itself, it's relative to the parent's font size. So there are several relative units options that are tied to the size of the viewport. They are covered in the responsive web design principles, so that's obviously further to come. Add a padding property to the elements with class redbox and set it to 1.5 ems. So add a padding property to the element class redbox, and we're going to add that in the space it provided, I suppose. So we're going to do padding, and we're going to do 1.5 ems. And that creates that. Now let's start fresh and talk about CSS Inheritance. Every HTML body has a body element, correct? We can prove that the body element exists here by giving it a background color of black. So we can do this by adding the following to our style. So let's do body, and we're doing a background color black, and that creates everything black. So in case, you should probably know this by now, but the body is the content of the page. So you're definitely gonna, you can always have a body. Now we've proven that every HTML page has a body element, and its body element can also be styled with CSS. So remember that you can first create an h1 element with the text hello world. So we're going to create that out of that. So we're creating an h1 element, and remember that's an open door, so we got to close that door behind it. And then from here we're going to write hello world. Then let's give all elements on your page the color of green by adding color green to your body. So color would be strictly hitting every element. So if you have H1s, Ps, etc., that would be affected by this right here. So we're doing green. So now our hello world is green. Finally, give your body element the font family of monospace. So remember font family, that means the font that we're going to use, the style of font. So we're going to do monospace. And that changed that text. And we are there. Alright, so sometimes your HTML elements will receive multiple styles that conflict with one another, which can be a little bit of a headache. So for example, your H1 element cannot both be green and pink at the same time. Let's see what happens when we create a class that makes text pink, then applies it to an element. Will our class override the body element's color green property? Create a CSS class called pink text. So we're going to go here, we'll call pink text, and we'll name it color pink, and then give your H1 element the pink text. So remember, we add a class here like this, equals, quotation marks, pink dash text. And so now it will override that because this class is very specific. So that's going to be the way you change global styling rules. So this would be a global styling rule for everything, and then you could start attacking it and changing the individual items that you want by using your classes. Our pink text class overrides our body's declaration. So we just proved that our classes will override the body's element. So the next logical question is, what can we do to override our pink text class? Create an additional CSS class called blue text. That gives an element the color blue. Make sure it's below your pink text class declaration. Apply the blue text class to your H1 element in addition to the pink text. So create an additional CSS class called blue text. It's going to be a class, so we use a period at the beginning. So blue text. And then make sure it's below your pink text. Correct. So if it was above our pink text, that means it would act first. This would act second. So apply the blue text class to your H1 element in addition to your pink text. So we'll do that here, blue text. So remember, your classes need to be one word because a space separates each class. So don't name your classes 2 words, but you should get into the habit of using Camel Case. So Camel Case would be something like color, red. So if that was your class, the first letter of each additional word would be capitalized. So color, and it's got to be blue. And so now, because it's in the second spot here and here, it overrides this. It doesn't matter which order the classes are listed in the HTML element, but however, according to the class decorations in the style section, it is important. All right. So we're more than 50% of the way through, so we're knocking this out. We're making great time. All right, we just proved that the browsers read CSS from top to bottom, which they do. Notice that if we had put the blue text before the pink text, like I said, the pink text would have taken over. But we're not done yet. There are other ways that you can override CSS. Do you remember ID attributes? Absolutely. Let's override your pink text and blue text class and make your h1 element orange by giving the h1 element an ID and then styling that ID. So remember to call an ID, we utilize the hash symbol, and it said orange text. So we're going to do orange text, and we're going to do color orange. And then we got to go down here, and after your class, never before, it's always after, well, at least normal conventions. So you're going to add that orange text here. Oops. Orange text. And it changes it to orange. Because remember, the hashtag symbol will attack that single item. Oops. We're 66% of the way. So we've proven that ID declarations override class declarations, regardless of where they are declared in your style CSS. So an inline style to try to make our h1 element white. Remember, inline styles look like this. Leave the blue text and pink text classes on your h1 element. Remember, so use an inline style to make our, okay. So it said leave the blue text and pink text classes. All right, so we're gonna do this. So style, and then we're going to write color white, and it changed the color to white. So inline styling like this is basically doing what's above here, but placing it directly in here. It's not really, so ID versus class has nothing to do with the order they appear. So it does not matter the order they appear. And ID, remember, is only targeting that one item. Normal conventions, though, and this is kind of reversed, is you add your class first and then you put your ID afterwards, though. At least every case that I've ever seen it. All right. Yeah, we just proved that inline styles will override, because the reason why inline style will override a class or an ID is you've directly inputted that information right on the item itself. So it's not even looking at the CSS file at that point. You've declared it is the most important. Then there's one more case in which the style will be overridden no matter what. And I don't know if they covered this in this, but it's exclamation point important. And a lot of people don't like using it, but you know, we do. So yeah, we just proved our inline styles will override all the CSS declarations in our style element. But wait, there's one last way to override CSS. This is the most powerful method of all, but before we do it, let's talk about why you would ever want to override CSS. In many situations, oh, there it is. In many situations, you will use CSS libraries. These may accidentally override your own CSS, so when you absolutely need to be sure that an element has specific CSS, you use exclamation point important. So let's go all the way back to our pink text. Remember that our pink text class was overridden by subsequent class declarations. Let's add the important to your pink text. Now, what happens with this is it's going to make sure that nothing can override it, that it has to be done. And so there's that pink text again. Did you know that there are other ways to represent colors in CSS? One of these is called hexadecimal, which is the most common. And you will end up memorizing at least your main colors. So depending on your company, you're going to definitely know like your color scheme off the top of your head because you're going to be touching it all the time. So we usually use decimals, our base 10 numbers. Hexadecimals are base 16 numbers. Doesn't really mean too much. In CSS, you can use 6 hexadecimal digits to represent colors. 2 each for the red. So the first 2 represent the red, the second 2 represent the green, the last 2 represent the blue. So replace the word black in our body with zeros. So that represents black. Oops, why is the B still there? That's 6. And the other thing is, you can do this with just 3. So when they're the same, you can just do 1, 2, 3. 1 for each. 1 for your red, your green, and your blue. And that's still past the test. Go figure. To review, hex codes use 6 hexadecimal digits to represent 2 for red, 2 for green, 2 for blue. From these 3 pure colors, RGB, which is another way to do coloring. You can do an RGBA or an RGB. And I'm pretty confident we're going to come over that though. So replace the color words in our style element with their hex codes. So we got our red text here. So we're going to put our reds FF000, I believe. Yeah. And then we're going to do green, which is 00FF00, 00FF00, and it has to be capital. I've never tried a lowercase actually. That worked, okay. And then Dodger blue, which is 1E90FF. Now, you're not expected to know this. So what you can do, and this is what I do, is you go to Google and you'll type in Hex color picker. And you can literally just go and pick your colors, and here you go, that's your hex code. Or your RGBA, which is right here. But hex is pretty much what it's going to be. So you can just choose whatever color, and let's say we wanted it to be this purple, and you just copy that code and use that for your hex. And so we have our Dodger blue and our orange text, which is FFA500. And now that's orange. Now notice before I added that, this obviously is hitting a very bright yellow because each character would be double. So that means if I add another F and another F and another A, it would go back to that. So this was FFA500. Many people feel overwhelmed by the possibilities of more than 16 million colors, and it's difficult to remember hex code. Fortunately, you can shorten it. For example, red's hex code, which is FF000 or F00. Okay, there it goes, explains that. Shortened form. 1 digit for red, 1 digit for green, 1 digit for blue. This reduces the total number of possible colors to around 4,000, but browsers will interpret it the exact same way. So, let's change this red to F00. And these are zeros, by the way. It's not O. It's the numeric number 0. So fuchsia is F0F. Cayenne was 0FF. Oops. And we have green, which is 0F0. Alright, let's run that, and we're good there. Another way is RGB. So this would represent black, this would represent white. So 0 is the lowest possible value, 255 is the highest possible value, and if all 3 are at the highest, that's your whites. And then if they're at the lowest, that's your darker blacks. Now you can mess with this to get different colors on the spectrum, but that's and same thing with this. So you can mess with this a little, get a little bit of green in there or a little bit of red, and that's when you're messing with it. Or you can just go for that hex color picker, and then you can find whichever value you need. So let's replace the hex code in our bodies element, and we're going to make it black. So we're going to go ahead here. We'll go RGB 0, 0, 0. Add your colon. we're good. We're almost there, 80% of the way. That means we've knocked out 4/5 of what we're supposed to do. So just like the hex code, you can mix the RGB in combination for different values. Replace the hex codes in our style element with the correct RGBs. So our blue is going to be RGB 0,0, 255. And the reason why it's 25500, red, green, blue. So if it's got to be blue, we need this to be the max. If we need it to be red, we want this to be the max. If we need it to be green, we want that to be the max. So we have our red here. So RGB 255, 0,0. And we have a orchard text, which is RGB. Then we have 218, 112, 214, and Sienna. So we have our RGB. Then we have 160, 82, 45. CSS variables. Highly recommend getting used to variables. I teach it all the time. So CSS variables are a very powerful way to change many CSS style properties at once. So instead of having to keep renaming it, you could just call the variable. So in Penguin class, change the black value to gray, the gray value. All right, so let's do this one at a time. So we're going to change this black value to gray. We're going to change the gray value to white. And then we're going to change the yellow value to orange. To create a CSS variable, you just need to give it a name with 2 hyphens in front of it and assign it a value like this. And you will definitely utilize this in your career. And it's a principle that also is utilized in SAS. So definitely get used to this. This will create a variable name. And you don't have to do this. I just do it because it makes life significantly easier. Because, well, it might be a little advanced, but you're going to set certain things that would be styled globally. And you would use like an asterisk for that. And that's where you can create all your variables for images. So you could say, black, green, whatever. And instead of having to enter the values for those colors, obviously for a normal black or gray, it doesn't make sense. But when you start getting into very specific colors, like for example this one, I would just name that a variable, and then you could call that variable instead of memorizing the hex code or the RGB value to achieve this color. In the Penguin class, create a variable name called Penguin Skin and give it a value of gray. So we're going to go here and notice how it says only change this code below this line, which means here, and above this line, which means here. It doesn't want us changing anything over here. So we're going to go ahead and do, we're going to indent that first, and then we're going to do Penguin skin, and we need it to be gray. Now, honestly, you're not really going to, in the future, you're not going to be wholeheartedly stuck on using names for colors. You will use those hex values and RGBs that we just went over. After you create your variable, you can assign it its value to other CSS properties for referencing the name you gave it. So background var, bam. So this will change the background of whatever element you are targeting to gray because that is the value of penguin skin. So apply this penguin skin variable to the background property of the penguin top, penguin bottom, right hand, and left hand. So change code below this line. So we're going to do var, which means variable, and then we're going to do penguin skin. So that's there. And now what we can do for simplicity's sake is just Control C, change it there, change it there, and change it there. Make sure that's it. Yep. And there we go. So instead of having to get the hex value every single time, we can just call our variable that we set up and just utilize that instead. So obviously it will make things a lot easier when you have custom colors being utilized. When using your variable as a CSS property value, you can attach a fallback value that your browser will revert to if a given variable is invalid. So, for example, you could set up your variable like this, but if this is not available for some reason, you can go revert to black. So this will set the background to black if your variable wasn't set. It looks like there's a problem with the variable supplied in Penguin Top, Penguin Bottom classes. Rather than fixing the typo, add a fallback value of black to the background property of Penguin Top and Penguin Bottom. So we're going to go ahead, and it's supposed to be black. So we're going to do black. And then we're going to do black here. And now we see that outline has come back. When working with CSS, you will likely run into your browser compatibility issues at some point. I can tell you, I don't care how amazing you are as a developer, Internet Explorer at some point is going to whoop your ass. And I hate saying that, but I promise you it happens to all of us all the time. So you're definitely going to want to learn different methods to combat that. So when your browser parses the CSS of a web page, and honestly, it happens all the time. For example, if you use CSS variable to assign a background color on the site in an Explorer, okay, an Explorer will ignore the background color because it does not support CSS variables. And what's crazy is a good portion of the population still uses Internet Explorer. There's no way around that, sadly. So you're going to have to learn how to use it. Yeah, well, here's the funny thing. Safari is doing the same thing. So Safari is trying to become the next Internet Explorer, and we have to figure out all this new styling for that. But it looks like the variable is being used to set the background color redbox class. Let's improve our browser compatibility by adding another background declaration right before the existing declaration and set its value. What? So now this is what I was trying to explain earlier. So this is your root. This is where you're setting all your variables, your page stylings, things like that. And this is where that's going to be. So variables will go there. You would probably set your margins on the page to 0, things like that. So it looks like the variable is being used to set the background color for a redbox class. Let's improve our browser compatibility by adding another background declaration right before the existing one to this. So we'll do background color red. Is that what it wants? Oh, it just needs to be background. And there we go. And we're almost done. When you create a variable, it is available for you to use inside the selector in which you create it. It is also available in any of the selector's descendants. This happens because CSS variables are inherited. To make use of the inheritance, CSS variables are often defined in the root element. Root is a pseudo class, and that matches the root element of the document, usually the HTML element. By creating your variables in root, they have been available globally and can be accessed by any other selector in the style sheet. Define a variable named penguin belly in the root selector and give it the value of pink. So we're going to do penguin belly color, pink. Well, that's not right. It is root, right? But something's wrong there because it just changed everything, didn't it? It changed the background, it changed everything. Oh, the body also has that. Okay, but I'm not supposed to change anything below that line, but that's not right. Anyway, when you create the variables in root, they will set that value to the variable for the whole page. So change the value of penguin belly to white in the penguin class. So we're going to change, wait, what? When you create the variables in root, they will set the value. You can overwrite these variables by setting them again with specific elements. So we're going to do background var, oh no, it's got to be this way, penguin belly white. There we go. CSS variables can simplify the way you use media queries. For instance, when your screen is smaller or larger than your media query breakpoint, you can change the value of a variable. Definitely take your time to understand media queries, because this is so important for site responsiveness. It is so important for keeping your site accessible on all screens. Huge deal. And in today's age, any major company, there's a saying that goes mobile first. You need to develop your websites with mobile in mind before you really think about the desktop. That is why media queries are so important, because most users now are utilizing their phones. They're going to your website on your phone. So you need to make sure that the site is very accessible and usable in that aspect. So mobile first, always consider your media queries. And you can set as many as you want and set your max widths. So as soon as this page exceeds 350 pixels, it will now jump to the next media query. So you're keeping things in the proper view. So in the root selector of the media query, change it so penguin size is redefined and given a value of 200 pixels. So we're going to go here, and it's going to be penguin size is 200 pixels. So it made it smaller, which looks a lot better. Also redefine penguin skin and give it the value of black. So penguin skin, and it's going to be black. And there we go. And we have finished the CSS section of FreeCodeCamp. Now, I highly recommend donating to FreeCodeCamp. You know, they will give you everything that you essentially need. And after this, tomorrow we'll do the applied visual design and all that other good stuff. But I think that's a good place to stop here. So make sure, and like I always say, comprehension matters more than completion. Obviously, I'm going through this a little fast since I know this, but I'm trying to give you the explanations along the way, the real life use case situations and scenarios, so that way you better understand what this is doing. But also, it's important to know these are things that you're going to utilize for literally the rest of your career. Don't rush. There's no reward for rushing, and there's no punishment for taking your time. Comprehension is greater than completion. And another thing that I always say is, you know, we're going to be learning a lot of things in our career. We have JavaScript, we have frameworks, we have, you know, backend languages, SQL, whatever it may be. If you rush through this, you're not going to remember it, and you're going to have to go to it again. So do you really want to go through that concept of relearning something that you relearned already? Because you can go through the same perpetual cycle over and over. Don't get stuck. Don't get caught up in that scenario. Take your time, learn these things, because they're extremely valuable. Not only that, one thing that I always try to end these, streams on a very high note. You're literally at a point now that you dreamed that you'd be at. You dreamed when you're at HTML that you would understand the basics of CSS. Now we just completed CSS, so you're there. Don't lose track of where you're going. You're making amazing strides. Even to get to this point, you can do so much with just HTML and CSS. You can make your static websites. You can make, quote generators, whatever it may be. You can do cool stuff. So be proud of this point that we're at now. Before going forward, don't get discouraged. You're killing it. And I know you're killing it. You're doing things that, just a month ago you didn't even think was possible. You're entering an amazing career field. You're learning the skill set that's needed. Definitely hang on and persevere no matter how difficult it may be. So what does it say? The mobile first comment. Great app for reviewing multiple device rendering simultaneously. There's that GitHub link. No problem. I love doing this. It's great for me. I'm obviously revisiting the basics, but I like that I'm able to break them down so that way you're understanding them better and you're clearing up misconceptions so you can keep going forward. Because at the end of the day, My life doesn't change. I just want to celebrate your success. Help me celebrate you. I want to celebrate you. And the only way I can is if you keep going, you keep building, and you keep persevering. Let's do this. You guys got this. I already know you can do amazing things. Let's just do it. I want to see what you guys can keep doing, keep growing, and keep going with it. So let me know if there's anything I can do on my side to help clear up any misconceptions, and I absolutely will. If you need to review this, I'm going to upload it to the YouTube channel, and I'm going to go ahead and put the YouTube link right here, youtube.com/DThompsonDev. All of my social media is the same thing. My Twitter is the exact same link. My YouTube, my Twitch, you can catch me at any of them. And if there's a way I can, help you learn a little bit more, then just let me know. But until the next time, thank you for joining me. I genuinely enjoyed this with you guys. Your jiu-jitsu instructor is correct. Slow is fast. Take it easy, guys, and I'll see you at the next one.